Thanks for joining us. John and I are going to give you an update on Cisco Secure Access, SASE, kind of what we're seeing going on in the world. So that's the goal for today. And the exciting part is John and I will kind of go through some different scenarios that we've seen and talk through really what's new. I think most people are aware of VPN, what it is, the drawbacks and the baggage that come along with it. We're going to basically just hit on zero trust real quick because I'm not sure everybody on the call if this has been like an interim discussion, but these last 2 years, everybody's trying to get together a roadmap, what it means to you, determine if it's a real thing or not. It is a real thing. We are helping folks with that. But today we're going to kind of relate that into one of the obvious areas that people pick for their ZTNA strategy, which is VPN. So with that, everybody's familiar with the problems with it, right? So it's these vulnerabilities of VPN gateways, and there's always a vulnerability on wherever your concentrators are. I think everybody's battled that for their careers. The other thing that's been hard too with the classic solutions is sometimes people have their VPNs too open. So that's something we're going to hit on today, as well as some of these other items that are really helped out by Cisco Secure Access. So anybody on this call that has a national footprint or international footprint with remote workers or contractors, you kind of know how hard that is to support essentially with the classic ways of doing it. The other big thing we'll cover, right, is not just the VPN part, but then also the secure internet access. With that, I'll just kind of keep rolling. One of the things that we see, right, if you just kind of stop and we say, hey, today we're going to talk VPN, one of the things that I'd say, like I mentioned earlier, everybody's been working on is saying, hey, what is zero trust? What does it mean to me? And is it a real thing? I'd say for most folks, as we scope it down for this call and this specific product, the number one thing of IT, right, is all of us we provide apps for users, and then network security teams, we provide access from the user to that app, right, or that device to that app, depending on what vertical you're in. It's things and users need to get to apps. We've been doing that a long time. Like we said earlier, sometimes too open, too broad. So then with most folks, we're trying to tighten that up a little bit with our zero trust initiatives, and we're just trying to say, hey, we need to provide users, devices, access to those apps, but only to the apps that user or device actually needs to see. So that's goal number one for application access. And then goal number two is it's kind of gone are the ways of split tunneling and letting users, decide if their internet security is on or off. Nowadays, it's always on internet security. So it's always on, everybody agrees, block the bad stuff, or the legal liability controls. So I think that's a oversimplified summary that almost everybody we work with agrees upon is those two goals. The other thing that I've seen changing a lot too is onboarding employees, things like that. We want to make sure that we meet those zero trust IT security goals, but we want to make it a seamless user experience. We don't want to have users pick oh, I'm going to that app, I got to click that. I got a multi-factor with this tool and then multi-factor over here. It's no, we want a seamless user experience. And then we'll kind of show how we can make that performance better for those end users. And then with any zero trust, ultimately what that means to achieve this is to figure out what the users and devices are. Identities are important. So I'm sure everybody on this call has an identity project, and you're trying to figure out, again, what vertical you're in or what your different device types are. But that's super important. The other important part too, as it relates to this call, app identities. So after we get our, cloud identity stores, whether you're Azure, Okta, so on and so forth, and then we get device identities figured out, the other thing that we'll kind of cover today too is you got to know what your app identities are. The other big thing, like with zero trust, is like we hear zero trust, or somebody wants to have a zero trust meeting, and then it's like zero trust of what, or zero trust of where, or like a lot of folks just say, well, I'm just going to buy a SASE solution, and now we have zero trust. So those are parts of it, but with every different client engagement we work with, we cover across the board. This is just representation of the heavy like network security projects. There's some cyber projects that are also overlay with this. But we focus in each one of those areas and prioritizing what's the most important depending on what your use cases are. And if it's going at it from an edge perspective or going at it from a data center perspective. Today, the core focus is going to be on the SSC and the SASE solution, but then usually at the same time, folks, they're via vendor and contractor access. It's also this will also provide a solution for that. So some of you might buy a solution for vendor access because that's your biggest problem right now, and you don't have a privileged remote access solution. So you might start with that. Other folks are going to fit into this SASE SSE use case bucket, which we're going to focus on today for Cisco Secure Access. And then just to level set on those two acronyms, SSE versus SASE, I'm sure everybody's heard them. For the focus of today, we just wanted to scope that, right? Because all three of these things are important, right, to meet those zero trust goals that we mentioned earlier. SD-WAN is our sites. Internet security, we want that on no matter inside the office, outside the office. We want that always on. And then that private access is, we need the private application access to on-prem, cloud, partner, or like B2B. Like if you are a parent company or acquiring, you need access to those. So how we look at it, we scope things, right? And this is kind of a backdrop is like, yeah, usually we look at like SSE being the primary use case is like those computers and those computers with an agent. And those would be typically computers, laptops that are, in the office, outside the office, moving around. That's our typical SSE use case. Or we combine the always-on internet security and then the private access with users authorized to access whatever the specific app that their role is entitled based upon your identity project. So again, we try to scope it to that. There is especially with Cisco, there's an option there where we can have we can handle non-agent-based devices with IPsec tunnels, but for today, we'll kind of keep focused on the client-based use case for laptops. So that's SSE to cover the internet security, private access, agents, computers, and then SASE would be over the top. And so if SASE can be over the top and solve the SD-WAN, the branch use case, so any branch site, we want to have the branch and SD-WAN also have the same security policy. As we just saw with SSE, you get VPN access or remote access with internet security. So SASE can encompass all of them. A lot of times, historically, SASE meant securing the offices of folks, which is why I kind of highlighted this blue box with the SD-WAN. And typically there, we're not as focused on agents. We're typically talking about SD-WAN appliances, firewalls, routers, whatever you have at your remote site as the traffic interception point. So that's the backdrop. And then as we start digging into the solution, right, this is like the traditional that everybody's used to. And the traditional is, we have these remote users on laptops up here. So we got remote users on laptops, they VPN. We all know how that goes, right? And everybody on this call, if you have VPN, it's like, hey, we VPN to a place, that place is our office or a data center. And then You either allow split tunnel for your internet traffic, right? That green line either gets split tunnel that bypasses, or we send everything to the data center, like is depicted here. And then clients are third party. So this is typically a problem with contractors, where sometimes VPN enrolling agents to third parties is a pretty tough thing and hard to scale. So I think everybody gets that. And then the fragmented part is like in this world, typically, VPN is kind of doing its own thing. Internet security is going a certain direction. And then the offices, they're riding whatever WAN topology you have or SD-WAN. And then they're maybe going to a different security solution, depending if you're breaking out internet out of your branch or if you're backhauling it to a data center. The obvious thing with SASE, and I think you've all seen this before, is we want to make it easier and we want a common policy across. If you're in the office, we want to secure it, only provide you access to the apps you need. If you're outside of the office, we want to apply that same policy. So we don't have to jump into 3 different consoles depending if you're in the office, out of the office, or in a specific site. So that's a good oversimplified goal for today. And then with that, as we look at Cisco and their SASE solution, Cisco Secure Access, the biggest thing we'll kind of cover, and we'll dig into this here a little deeper coming up, but the big thing here is we're going to keep this flow for today, where all the clients are on the left, and they're either coming from a managed endpoint, an unmanaged endpoint, or from a device, a remote site. So an office, a branch, a clinic, a warehouse, a plant, whatever your site is, they come from the left. And then our apps and our resources are on the right-hand side. The big difference here now is Cisco Secure Access is a cloud SaaS solution. So they host all of these services for us. And these services are cloud-hosted VPN concentrators, if you will. That's the biggest, closest analogy to make there. So our cloud-hosted VPN concentrators and our cloud-hosted internet security solution, our cloud-hosted firewall, or secure web gateways, usually the core that most people are familiar with. So that's the backdrop of what we're going to really dig into today. And then John, if you can kind of walk us through the components that we're going to need to set up for this cloud SASE solution. You can kind of set us up with this, then we'll kind of pivot into more specific use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. So the first thing we need to talk about is how and what are my apps, right? Matt had mentioned it earlier in this presentation, is we need to understand what the users are trying to get to, whether that's private applications, SaaS, just the internet itself, things like that. So we start with private applications. How do we connect those up to this POP for secure access? So the SASE solution is a cloud-based thing that needs to know about what we're using for private applications if we intend those users to access these applications via that secure unified policy sort of bubble in the middle of that last diagram. So the private applications can be added a couple of different ways. The network tunnel, this is the one we're kind of traditionally used to, and as we've kind of come toward these cloud delivered services, is a basic IPsec tunnel from wherever the app is hosted, whether that's in our data center or it's in the public cloud in Azure. We place in like a CSR or some sort of device that will control and handle that tunnel. And it's just a traditional IPsec tunnel up to the secure access POP. And then that's the connectivity between the app and secure access itself. The other one that's a little newer is what's called the resource connector. So this is actually a deployment of an instance or a VM that you deploy next to the application, and all of the hole punching is, you don't need to punch holes in the firewall. It's a lot simpler to manage, and it basically connects less networking, and it's abstracting that piece, and it's connecting you direct to resource and application. So you can define these resource connectors based on that, rather than having to understand exactly what's happening with the plumbing underneath the covers versus the traditional IPsec tunnel, right? So you get the auto failover and load balancing. And again, this is all private apps. So your resource connector is sitting next to your application. That's doing outbound connections to secure access to grab all of its data, policy, things like that, and holding that right there at the resource connector.
Yeah, and so the big thing there, we'll keep this in mind and we'll double click on this, but this is a lot different than the old way, right, John, which is public IP on the internet. This is a VM, put it close to the app, outbound connection, phones home to the cloud, and I guess we'll double click on that as well, coming up.
Yep, and all DTLS tunnels. I don't think I mentioned that too. So those are certificate based as well. So that's our private applications, how we connect those to the SASE solution. Now we have to worry about our internet delivered applications, Office 365, our SaaS applications, Monday.com, things like that. So secure access would have that connection to those, and then we can use the policies to determine is this something we need to secure? Is this something that it's a trusted SaaS app that we understand the client, connect directly to it. We can do trusted SaaS bypass for specific things, or we can use something like secure internet access through the secure access cloud to make sure that that policy that we're talking about, which we'll talk about later, that unified security policy and posture that ends up happening, we make sure that the clients accessing the SaaS apps run through the same scrutiny and the same process of security, whether they're getting to a private app, a public app, etc. So that's sort of the connection there with secure access. We have the ability to bypass so that we keep that performance if it's a trusted app. Otherwise, if we know that we need the security policy and posture to be there, we can perform the same checks, whether it's a cloud app, SaaS app, or a private app.
Yeah, and like Microsoft, right, John? Microsoft says bypass everything, turn off all security.
Right.
That's up to you what your company policy is, but yeah, usually it's at least the audio apps, right? We see as a socially accepted, trusted bypass app.
Right. Exactly. So that's the applications and the data center part of it. The other piece that we want to mention needs to be there. Matt kind of described it as for lack of a better term, your cloud VPN concentrator, right? So somehow the users have to connect up to this secure access POP. So this is what they call kind of their traffic acquisition suite. And we're going to talk about each of these in context to the clients in a little bit. But basically, you need a place for those tunnels from the endpoints or from the devices that we're talking about of the things needing to access the apps. We've done the right half of the diagram with the applications and how they talk back and forth secure access. Now we have to talk about how do we receive those tunnels and receive that traffic from the user, and that's done through these, the ZTA proxy and the clientless component that we'll talk about in a little bit. Your traditional like remote VPN, we can VPN to secure access instead of directly to a data center. We'll talk about the use cases like I mentioned, but then you work through. Once you get the traffic there, then it kind of works through this workflow of what you're seeing here, which is authentication. Are we doing MFA, device posture, right? All that security policy stuff that is being unified by this gets to run that device through those things, and then secure web gateway, DLP, CASB toward all those applications. So we're obscuring whatever the application is, whatever the user is, doesn't necessarily matter. We're going to run through this flow exactly the same no matter who it is. And these are the ways that we get in that red box, get those clients onboarded into the secure access client so that we can or secure access POP, I should say, to get them through the security policy while they access the app. So let's talk a little bit about client agent, right? So this doesn't work without some form of agent on the device. We're going to talk about clientless in a little bit, but really your users in the company, right? These are your employees, these are your laptop users. They need some way to make sure that we can enforce that policy all the way down to the endpoint. The traditional problem has always been, I have security enforcement at the branch, but then when the laptop leaves, they make the choice whether or not to turn on the VPN and whether or not they're going through the corporate firewall for that security policy. Secure client, which is, you notice the icon is very familiar to us. 15 years we've been working with AnyConnect VPN. Secure Client is sort of the next evolution of the AnyConnect product. It ties in a lot of different things, and we're going to talk about all those components in a second. But really, it comes down to the fact that we need a client of some sort on the endpoint, and this client does a lot of things. It still has the traditional VPN um, product with the DTLS or SSL VPN tunneling that we can carry all ports and protocols across that VPN tunnel. But then we have a couple new things like the ZTNA module, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that um, isn't necessarily required to be a full tunnel VPN. We have application based traffic steering. So we can say, Zero Trust for the published applications from Secure Access. This client knows how to get to those applications via the Secure Access Cloud. And then there's also the web roaming module. This traditionally has been talked about as the umbrella roaming module. That's now been tied in with this account or this secure client as well. So it's all one client on the machine rather than having 4 or 5 agents for the different things. Cisco's combining them all into this one agent and allowing you to select which modules you use for each of those clients. So you can use just VPN like you've always done, or as you kind of step up the scale, you have the ZTNA module you can add to it, umbrella roaming security. Previously, AMP for endpoints has also been brought in as the secure endpoint product, and there's a bunch of different modules. We'll talk about those in a second, but one more slide before, just to understand clientless. So
Yeah.
there's users where we control the asset. There's also users where we don't necessarily control the asset. So this is Cisco's answer to this question is an unmanaged endpoint happens through a browser. What happens here, we're using the connection from the data center and that application to publish a cloud hosted URL. And then when we browse to that URL, we're brought through the same security policy procedure through login, all of those things directly in the browser, right? So it's supported. Any browser that supports SAML, you can do this with, like Matt was saying, we connect this up to your cloud identity provider. You have SAML, and you have the ability to do some basic posturing here for those web apps. So a unmanaged contractor can just browse to that URL to get access to whatever published apps behind the secure access. I don't want to call it a firewall, but behind the secure access cloud, those applications get published. They log into that cloud URL. Now they have an identity within the browser, and they can use that to access those different things, assuming they have access to them.
Yeah, and just like a good example, I think people have always run into problems with getting access, but if you needed John to help you out with ICE or your firewall, it's like, how do you get John access to ICE or your firewall and then make sure he doesn't have access to anything else, right? The easy solution here is we can publish that app for him. Cisco hosts the portal, they host the DNS, they host everything. And we just say, hey, John, you can have access to ICE and FMC because that's what you're working on. John goes from his Evolving Solutions Managed laptop to your portal, authenticates MFAs, and then boom, you have access to ICE and FMC.
And it's all based, all the policies based on the identity of who's logging in, right? So that's you're always tied to that identity through this solution. There's no, I'll give you access to a network segment. It's always tied to that identity. So just a rundown, we'll kind of walk through this because a lot of you have probably seen AnyConnect before and all the different modules, but here's secure client and kind of what it can look like if you have all the flags checked, right? You don't necessarily have to do this with this many modules, but here's what they all are. You have your traditional AnyConnect VPN module, and then we have the Zero Trust Access module, which we're going to talk about. That's a newer thing to the offering. Network Access Manager, ICE posture, these are normal things, right? Secure firewall posture. This is like the host scan UI that was in there for a while. There's no specific UI to this, but that's an item that's in there. I already mentioned AMP is now secure endpoint. That's tied in with this agent, as well as the umbrella module or the umbrella roaming agent. That is now a part of this as well. And then there's a few other things going on in the background, like diagnostics and reporting. So the DART tool is there. There's no UI for the user on the device. However, we get all those statistics back at the head end, which we'll talk about in a second. A new one that's coming or that is in there is the Thousand Eyes reporting. So now the Thousand Eyes endpoint agent, which many of you have probably heard about, that is also a part of this package or can be a part of this package if you run the enablement tool. And then you get those synthetic tests and that user experience monitoring right alongside your zero trust access modules and your AnyConnect VPN. So,
Yeah, and a good summary, right, is this is super busy depending on where what you have, and you're going to go to the new one nobody's maybe seen before is the zero trust access one, and then it's going to be maybe the umbrella roaming, right? So you might just have two modules that are active and cloud. The components will be cloud hosted, cloud managed for those, so it can be a lot simpler um, than this showing kind of
right.
throwing the kitchen sink at it.
Exactly. So here's the architecture. So the stuff in blue were existing components, not fundamentally changing, just being renamed and grouped together, right? So you have your VPN, your umbrella, network visibility and monitoring, the CSE or the old AMP. So that's your Cisco Secure Endpoint. Those things already existed, whether they were their own agent or they were a part of the AnyConnect already. Secure Client is encompassing those plus some new components like the cloud managers and then the unified like UI for all those things, the ZTNA module, stuff like that. So I want to talk a little bit about the ZTA module because it's the newest one or it's the one that we probably haven't seen a lot. So this module is specifically for the secure access product. Um, you're basically configuring all those private applications we talked about from the data center, and then your ZTNA framework would dictate through the policy you hold in secure access how these endpoints, based on their identity, can get to and from those applications. So you have your client proxy, and then there's an interconnect interception point at which we grab that information and try to figure out, does this user, is it supposed to have access to this product or this application? Is it supposed to be internet bypass? There's a decision point at which this module makes that decision, and that happens on the endpoint. So it's faster, it's quicker. It's certificate based as well, so it's DTLS. So if you have a valid certificate, there's no setup that needs to be right. It can just be machine off. We can layer on authentication steps to it though. So I can do a certificate for a corporate workstation or a corporate laptop and endpoint plus my Office 365 login to get me to certain levels of authentication or authorization. And then the really nice part is if anybody's worked with certificates in the past, one of the struggles is expirations and like trying to make sure the renewals happen and the client's not behaving right. This module and these client does all that kind of for you basically. So if there is something wrong with the certificate or the certificate is expired, there's an automatic enrollment process that happens based on those identity features. So if I log in, if I have all the right information, I get through MFA, there's a provisioning process that happens to put that certificate, a good certificate down onto the client. So now the next time I log in, I'm not doing 6 steps of authentication. I may just need my laptop and my login and I'm logged on and now I have access to those published apps. So there's 3 ways to deploy this client. The deployment models are no cloud management. So this is your traditional AnyConnect, right? You stick the packages on your head end firewalls or wherever you have that hosted. They browse to it. That's where they can grab the packages. All the security policy is focused there. And that is completely an option, right? It's not talking about secure access so much as what we're focused on today, but that's your option for you can do the secure client right there on the firewall, just like you always have if you want to. The other 2 options are kind of newer. So there's the cloud registration with no package management. This would be for companies that don't want to have the package be readily accessible to anybody. Basically, they control the implementation of the package onto the endpoint themselves in a staging process or a process where they're getting the user online in the orientation, for example. But all the registration and things are happening against secure access in the XDR cloud. The other option, and sort of this is the full shebang, is everything's handled in the cloud. So the package management, which modules end up in the packages, how we do the enrollment, all that stuff, as well as the security policy, all handled in the cloud. And for us, for the purpose of this, that cloud is the Cisco XDR cloud. Cisco is making a concerted effort to make that the endpoint sort of object of truth to where all the endpoint information feeds into that from the various integrated sources. And that's where I can make my security policy. It's where I can control my package deployment. I can understand my assets, etc. So this one, real quick, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the workflow of this diagram, but if you've heard of Thousand Eyes, which I think Cisco's made sure everybody has heard of Thousand Eyes, the Thousand Eyes endpoint agent is a part of this as well, and will be able to run those synthetic tests like I mentioned, so you get that end-to-end visibility. It's one of the things that client-based or agent-based solutions in the past, sometimes the visibility is tough to understand, okay, what's my problem? I know I have an endpoint agent and I have a VPN concentrator, but I don't know what's happening in between, and I don't have visibility into it. Cisco's layering in Thousand Eyes, so I get that context around, is it the device? Is it the Wi-Fi network at the user's home? ISP, transit ISP, BGP cloud issues, all that stuff. Your traditional Thousand Eyes agent, endpoint agent monitoring tied in with the client, and you get all that context data. And now you have, again, you don't have 4 agents on a machine, you just have the one, but you get all the features of Thousand Eyes, Umbrella, Secure Endpoint, and the VPN. So a lot of information about the client, right? Because that's kind of the newer, there's some changes there. The branch connectivity is really pretty simple, right? So we still have a branch. We still have users in that branch with traditional networking gear. We still have a router at the edge or some sort of firewall of some sort. We have our SD-WAN option to get tunnels to where we need to go, something that's coming, automatic tunnels and automatic setup of tunnels with Catalyst SD-WAN to secure internet access, or to do secure internet access, excuse me. That's coming later this year. We're thinking probably December. But the point here is there's still a branch, there's still users in the branch that need to still have this security policy. If we're trying to unify everything to one security policy and one management platform, what about the people at the branch? Here's our solution to it, right? It's an IPsec tunnel up to secure access at this point. If you're using Catalyst SD-WAN and later on Meraki SD-WAN, you'll have the ability to turn on automated tunnels to and from the secure access cloud. And now those ingress points of those users, the branch becomes one of the spots where we're ingressing with those ZTNA features, and the security policy gets applied to everybody at the branch, including all those users that take their laptops home.
Yeah, and I think the big thing there, John, right, is for common policy, this is where we pick up all those headless devices in a branch, the stuff flowing home to the internet, IoT, guest internet. So anybody that hasn't broken out guest internet yet, this is the way to pick that up and at least get some legal liability security on those guest users as well. All right, so let's hit some of the use cases. And this is where we'll dig a little deeper, and then, maybe as a follow-up with everybody, we can get the next layer deeper into what your architecture is. But one thing where this is extremely obvious is the more latency you put in, the more obvious this is. For somebody that has like a data center. Let's say if we have a data center in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, wherever your data center is, Chicago. That's where your data center is. The old world, we used to centralize everything there. And then when we had people throughout the US that are in the offices, outside the offices, having them backhaul to Minnesota to get to the internet or to get to every application or a cloud application. A lot of times that wasn't ideal. And then that's when you had to start split tunneling traffic or bypassing your security because they complain. So then you say uncle, right? So now imagine overnight we can turn on secure access, and now we can have these firewalls wherever your users are around the world, right? So we could have we could be a national, we could have just a national deployment, users spread out all throughout the US, Canada, anywhere in North America. Overnight we can have firewalls delivered, internet circuits delivered, routing, core delivered in 3 pops, like immediately right now. We could have delivered in the US. And those are the Cisco cloud cloud hosted, firewalls in secure access, as well as these can also be, private access on ramps, if you will, or these cloud hosted VPN concentrators. So we can immediately have 3 deployed inside the US. So that one's there. We've also come at it from the other way too, where we have folks that say, "Hey, I have a branch in somewhere in Europe," or we have some users fulfilling a business function in India, right? Having them VPN back to Minnesota isn't ideal to get to an internet application. So again, immediately we can deploy a cloud delivered firewall in India and pick which POP it's going to live in India. And we can have a cloud VPN concentrator there. And then all of these are, again, SaaS. So Cisco hosts those. These are those, those on-ramps that John showed earlier. These are all those endpoints, but you get the idea, right? This is a visual of immediately, it's SaaS, we can deploy them. And then now we have all of these regions to onboard. You could still build all this yourself, but I'm guessing it'll take more than 2 hours to build 5 POPs with internet, do redundancy, DNS load balancing, and DDoS, right? I think that'd take a little bit. So that's the backdrop. And then usually folks have a use case. If it's international or global or national, we want to just distribute it so we can have regional based internet access or on-ramps. Now I want to focus on private access and say, so this is really the new part, right? So with secure access, a lot of people are coming to us saying, "Hey, we have AnyConnect or some VPN. I got to do a zero trust project. I want to hide things off of the internet. I want to stop getting yelled at from my security team about vulnerabilities and my stuff showing up on pen test." So this is where this comes in. The resource connector is what John said. So that's that DM that we put over here in the data center. We put it in Azure. We put it in an acquisition that we're working with, or a B2B partner. We drop that in the network. This is that VM we described. Put it as close to that app as possible. It reaches out to the cloud, and then we can advertise services, specific services that are available from each one of these resource connectors. So this is a new component, the resource connector. It's the new guy. Everybody's here to talk about the ZTNA or the new parts. This is the new part. So this would replace your classic ASA VPN concentrator. These guys create those outbound only tunnels to the internet, right? So you don't got to poke holes in the internet. It just rides out your internet to this resource connector gateway that Cisco hosts for you in that region, right? So those 5 regions I just showed you, there's a gateway in that region that your apps will connect to allow services. And then we'll kind of talk through the clients, right? The kind of clients coming from the agents that John already described. So putting that all together, this is the new part, right? We got these resource connectors out here. They tunnel to the cloud and they say, "Great, I got a service available." We roll out the agents to the computers, say, "Great, you want to access those services. We'll integrate with your identity store, and then based upon the roles, we can map a role to an application, and then that application will be routed to whichever resource connector has those applications in them, and that will be based upon IP address or domain name for those objects to do that user to app kind of binding, if you will." So that's the big part. Is now overnight, anybody here that's global, we could have 5 POPs or more throughout the US, deploy these resource connectors, deploy agent on the software, all outbound. They meet in the middle, and we can do user-based to app policies. And that's why most people, when they think zero trust, they're thinking that, right? Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say one of the benefits, or one of the biggest benefits of that, is the network obscurity from the user's perspective, right? The user doesn't need to know what firewall to VPN to. There's no visibility directly to the apps. Everything's proxied through the resource connector and the resource connector gateway. You don't need to do any plumbing. All those are automated tunnel creations up to secure access. Inside the secure access cloud is where Cisco's handling all those hosting features. All that stuff is done for you. You don't have to figure out, well, I don't have to traffic engineer how I get from point A to point B if I don't want to.
Yeah, no, that's a for sure great point. So the outbound, hide the IPs, and then in this new world too, it acts as more like a proxy, like you said. So we can have those overlaps. Another use case that either comes first or second is, how do I get John Lee access to my network to help me out with something? So if I deploy the one virtual machine resource connector in like the on-prem data center, for example, and then we'll have this published Cisco hosted URL that we can give to John so he can connect to, and then we can tie him to the resources he needs to access. That's great because Cisco does all the DNS, they do all the internet plumbing, the load balancing, they handle all of that for John, no matter where he's at. They host that for you, and then it's not a static NAT on the internet that is attackable on your network anymore. So most folks find that as a big value add for BYOD vendors, contractors. The kind of immediate benefit. This is sometimes it's a niche use case, but it's a value add of Cisco is that everything on the right is still the resource connector, but on the left-hand side, the difference here is now we can also support IPsec tunnels. So if anybody has like a thing that needs to talk to a resource, like could be an I series on the right, and then you have a scanner or a printer or something you can't put an agent on, and maybe it's all you have as a router at the remote site, no fancy SD-WAN yet. We can IPsec tunnel from a B2B or any device to connect to this cloud, and then you can authorize what they can access against one of those resource connectors.
That's also for the all ports and protocols too. So even if it's not a headless client, some companies have applications that use non-standard ports. They're not web-based, they're not browser-based. That's the use case for that as well, right? Is being able to use all ports and protocols on this versus, that's the Cisco value add is they still have that full tunnel ability from that client with the same agent, with the same resource connectors, with the same secure access, same security policy. Now I can full tunnel all of that ports and protocols and all the different traffic to those applications that might not be a standard web app or something like that. That's the other use case for this one.
Yeah, great point. Because anybody that's looked into ZTNA, some solutions right there, they say, oh, if you have a soft phone, we don't support that, or you want to RDP from the data center, oh, we don't support that. So this is an option where for sure you can tackle any scenario. So those are the common things we work with on you for private application access. And we use this cloud delivered VPN concentrators, outbound only. We hide things from the internet. But then the next part everybody wants to do too is get that common internet security policy. And so this is where the cloud delivered firewall comes in. So everything else we talked about is the same thing, except now we're trying to get a user to a SaaS app, not data center, Azure, AWS, GCP. We're trying to get them to the internet, and we want that internet policy. John already hit this. We got the client on a computer. You're all familiar with that. We get you to the cloud, and then we hit you through our cloud delivered services, for our security services, and then also that NAT happens there. So you're not getting NATed to your IP address, you're getting NATed to a different public IP, which is good for hiding yourself and your users from the internet as well. For branches, this is common. We already kind of covered this where we got users, VPN, get to our cloud firewall. Now I want to cover all my users, regionally, nationally, globally. We want to get into that same security policy for logging and just to simplify things. And that's where that that tunnel comes in. A future design session, we can talk about, load balancing and BGP, tunnel failover, auto tunnels, right? We could have future on that. Otherwise, the takeaway is, Cisco supports a gig and they support multiple tunnels from your branch locations. One thing I just wanted to show is like one value add of Cisco Secure Access. So this is an example of the portal. The one nice thing with Cisco is we can do everything in one place. So we can either start with just, hey, we already have internet access covered. So we can just start with private access and use those resource connectors and put the agent on the computer with the ZTNA agent. And then we can authorize John to get to specific applications. Or we can just do internet access and we can say, hey, I just want to make sure my remote users have always on internet security, or tackle that internet in international problem. The value out of Cisco though is we can do both in one place, and we don't got to jump between 3 or 4 portals to just get private access done, as well as internet security policies for our users.
So every component that we've been talking about, that account all the security of policy, is applied in one sort of top-down flow, versus this flow or this access control policy will catch the branch users, versus this one catches the endpoints, versus this one over here catches our DNS security and DLP. Like that one policy applies no matter which product is doing the enforcement.
So real quick, right? I always like to say, hey, okay, great. Like, what decisions do I have to make? And like, what are my options for this? So that's usually when I go look at data sheets, things like that. I usually try to find something like this. And with Cisco, it's pretty straightforward. You get the option of just doing internet access or just doing private access. So you can just do one or the other. Or both. And if we do both, they're in that same portal. If you just do one, we can just apply policies for internet or private access in that portal we just showed. Depending on your use case and zero trust like priorities, some of these, one might be more important, or we do both. The big thing here is you can size them based upon, you have internet access coverage for everybody, but then private access, like if you don't have as many mobile laptops and stuff leaving the office, you can do a fewer count of private access users. The biggest things that we see for security differences is really it just comes down to the firewall as a service. So all ports and protocols, a lot of folks want always on security, all ports protocols with IPS. So those are typically the things that tip you over into advantage. And then once you're there, it's like DLP, some of the more advanced security options come in. So we'll already have CASB, but then we get DLP for the web apps, as well as other things get added like browser isolation. So hopefully that's helpful to kind of level set. Like we were talking earlier, we can choose to solve the internet problem, the private access problem, both. And we saw it depends on security capabilities is what it comes down to down at the bottom, right? So with that, we hopefully at this point you're at least familiar with Cisco Secure Access, right? And that's Cisco's cloud-hosted SASE solution, so that we can do software-based, get our traffic to the cloud, have the cloud, all of our POPs, our firewalls, internet connections be hosted. So hopefully you're familiar now with how we get them, the users to the cloud with the agent or the network tunnels. Then we can pick, we're going to secure internet access or private access, and then hide all that stuff from our on-prem IPs, right? Hide all that, shut off those static NATs. That's big there. And then like these things that immediately for folks that say, hey, are not sure like value. It's like folks that have a global or national footprint, and you don't have regional internet or regional POPs built yourself. then for sure, right out of the gate, this is a common use case for the remote international global workers. And then we already talked about hide your assets as much as possible, especially any of those internal apps. They shouldn't be static nets to the internet anymore. The last thing from our perspective, things that we can do to help would be, reach out to us for like your zero trust roadmap. And this is typically it's one of the priorities. It's just a matter of where it fits in. So we kind of help through that. And then everybody is at a different place for the different products and systems that you currently have in place, and then timelines or expiration of contracts, things. Everybody's got something unique. So for sure, we'll help out with that. But our goal, with all of our projects is to make sure we all agree on what our zero trust roadmap is. And then we'll figure out where does SASE or SSE fit into that roadmap. How does, where's your identity project? Where's your, your SOC maturity project? And then, folks that know us know we've done SD-WAN for many, many years. And a lot of people are either looking to their next generation of SD-WAN now, and we're trying to figure out how do we deliver these cloud services. So that's keeping us busy right now. And then the other item too is folks that are still building out your cloud presence. We're still working with a lot of folks on their Azure, AWS deployments and trying to get their users direct access to that application when they're outside of the office. And so that's a pretty common ask in parallel sometimes to all the other common VPN replacement projects that we typically see. And so with that, I think for sure we concluded. I don't know if there was any outstanding questions that haven't been answered. If there is, feel free to throw those into Q&A chat. And that any that aren't answered already, we'll make sure we follow up via email. Appreciate the time, and thanks for joining us on today's webinar.